Hi, everyone. We will get started in just a minute with this free GMAT prep hour, but I want to give everyone a chance to join. My name is Tiffany, as you can see on the slide here. I am a GMAT instructor with Manhattan Prep, and I have been for a while. I scored a 760 on the GMAT, and I've coached several of my students to reach similar scores as well. So I actually love to hear those success stories when students write back to me and tell me how they've been doing. I like to hear the other stories too, of course, where they tell me things that they've been struggling with and can use help on. Excellent. Well, I hope that all of you are excited tonight to talk about the GMAT. In the chat, please let me know, how long have you been studying for? Have all of you been studying for a little while? You just getting started? Love to hear about these stories. And I would say too, just as everyone's typing in, all different kinds of stories I hear, right? And there's really no one path to achieving your goal score in the GMAT. So if you've just started studying and you're feeling like, you only want to do it one time, then that's great. That can absolutely work out for you. If you have studied several times, that's absolutely okay. Sometimes that's what it takes. Every time you spend about 6-ish months, sometimes less than that though, and you have not studied for a while, I'd say that's a new attempt, right? Sometimes it can take as little as 3 months before you kind of start to forget things. Just depends on how much studying you do before you stop. All right, let's get started here. Okay, we offer a lot of free resources. Just as a quick reminder, you can try live GMAT courses with us. The first class session is always free. I do have a class coming up in September. There are a lot of other options to choose from. We offer our on-demand course for free as well, so you can try that out. And if you go to this website right here, GMAT/resources, then you will be able to see a bunch of other free materials. So if you want to study with a course, then obviously that's an option. But if you want to study by creating your own materials, then that's perfectly fine as well. All right. Today, we are going to talk about an important topic. Today, we're talking about time sets. I know that I at least talk to my students all the time about time sets being very important, and they should make time sets and complete them. Many of you probably have read the same thing and been doing that on your own. Ultimately, though, we need to talk about why they're important, right? What about these are so critical? How much time should you give yourself on time sets? How many problems should you include? 4 is often a number that's tossed around for quant, but why 4? And then the kind of question that brings us here, right? How do you choose problems for your sets? How do you make a really good time set that serves your needs? And then last, we'll talk a little bit about reviewing those time sets after you complete them as well. So this is a really important part of studying. If you don't know what a time set is, it is a pretty direct name, honestly. It's pretty straightforward. Basically, sometimes you're going to be studying by doing individual problems. Sometimes you'll be taking practice exams or CATs, computer adaptive test. Sometimes you'll do something in the middle, basically, where you put together several questions. It can be any number that you choose. You time yourself on those questions and you try to get through all of them in the time that you give yourself. And again, 4 for quant is just an often used number, but it doesn't have to be 4. It really depends on your goals. So that's kind of a preview of what's to come. Excellent. The purpose of time sets. Your number one goal with a time set really is to practice timing across multiple questions. A lot like the official exam, but on a much smaller scale, right? So you're putting together a bunch of different skills when you do a time set. Number one, you're putting together you're using the skill of actually solving each individual problem. So you're having to make sure that every problem you approach in a really good way. For quant, I had an understand, plan, solve session recently. So if you need help figuring that out, then definitely go check that out, because Knowing how you're going to approach each problem is really, really important to getting through a time set and through the official exam successfully. That's really your first goal, but there are several others, as you can see here. Number one is to address difficult question types. So maybe there is a question type that you're not quite comfortable with yet. Could be data sufficiency for quant. I hear that from a lot of folks. Could be sentence correction or reading comprehension. It could be anything, right? But if you're not comfortable with a certain question type, then you want to address that both through individual problems that you do, but also with timed sets. Similarly, you might need to address weaker areas in your solution strategy. So for quant, that brings up maybe you're not using alternative solution methods. Maybe you have a big problem when it comes to taking time to set a good plan before you jump into solving. It could be a lot of different things, but maybe you want to practice a particular strategy for yourself. And then, of course, content areas as well. And I put this one last on purpose amongst this 2, 3, and 4, because a lot of students come to me and they say, oh, I'm struggling with fractions, I'm struggling with this. And they'll really lean toward content heavy. But when I watch them perform the tasks and finish these problems, I think, yeah, it seems like you really understand the content. It's more about your process or more about not seeing the solution method that would work out the best for you. So I put that last because it does happen. There are content areas you need to focus on, but think about these other things first. Maybe it's a data sufficiency problem and you struggle with that. Maybe your solution method wasn't airtight, so you struggled with that. Numbers 5 and 6, practice managing the anxiety of being timed. This could be a whole session in itself, talking about the anxiety of a timed exam. And some of you probably feel that pressure. Honestly, I don't think I've ever talked to anybody who doesn't feel any sort of testing anxiety whatsoever. And when I say that, there's a wide range, right? Some people who get incredibly anxious, can't function very well. And then some people who, just maybe experience a little bit of an elevated heart rate, but that's still kind of an anxiety manifesting in your body. Most people don't go into a testing situation feeling more calm than they normally do. And managing that is a really big deal. So anxiety truly can be kind of a make or break situation where you walk into the test and you've been performing really well in your practice exams, but you see a score drop on the official exam. That's possible. What I would say is that you can manage that by practicing that in advance, right? Practice calming behaviors when you perform these time sets. Make sure that you have a plan for what happens if you start to panic on a problem. And then number 6, really structuring your study time. So time sets are a great way to just know what you're going to do, right? If you sit down and study, sometimes my students ask me, yeah, but what do I do during a study session? You can certainly do some reading. You can certainly watch videos or attend sessions like this, but timed sets are another really good way for you to structure your study time and spend your time. Yeah, I just saw this question about sentence correction. This is a great question. Yeah. So if you are spending 2 minutes or 3 minutes for SC or CR, that's definitely longer than you want to be spending on those problems. Skipping faster. When you're performing time sets, my advice to you, sorry, I'll read this for the folks who are watching the recording later on. This panelist said they noticed that they spend 2 minutes on SC or CR or 3 minutes and accuracy is only 50%. Think they have to skip these faster. Are there any recommendations on how to skip faster, particularly for SC? How to skip faster. When you are starting a time set, maybe you want to do a time set that's completely sentence correction focused, since that seems to be a weaker area for you. When you do that, what you want to do is spend a few seconds, I'd say maybe 10 seconds at the beginning of each problem, and you want to decide if that is a problem that you're going to solve. And that's not true just for SC. This should be every question you see on the GMAT. Sentence correction, critical reasoning, even on the quant section, data sufficiency, problem solving, you should see the problem pop on the screen your first reaction should not be picking up your pencil and solving immediately. It should be, I'm going to understand the information that's given to me here. I'm going to form a good plan about what to do with this information. And I'm really going to decide whether this is a problem for me. You know, you don't have to get every problem right, and you won't get every problem right. And you'll still get an awesome score. You can still score in the 700s and miss quite a few problems, really. So yeah, my recommendation for skipping faster is to make a conscious decision. Sounds like you're probably spending a little bit of time solving and jumping into that and getting stuck in that without consciously deciding, yes, I'm going to solve this problem, or I don't know, this one looks pretty tricky. I think I might just pass. The really, really difficult problems hurt your score less than the easy and moderate problems. So if you miss a really difficult problem, it's not that bad. It's not that big of a score impact. That's what you want to be assessing. Is this problem really difficult, or is it something that's just really difficult for me personally? You should have your own personal burn list of things that, you know, you spend a lot of time on and you don't get them right most of the time. All right. Because we were talking about time sets, I would like to do a time set, just a short one. And then we're going to talk a little bit after that time set about exactly how this time set was created, what exactly it's going to be focused on. So I'll ask you some questions afterward, but don't be focused on that right now. Just be focused on however you best perform your time sets. My last note on this slide is practice like you want to perform. So every single time set that you do, or every single problem that you do, really, you want to go into it and think, how would I want to do this on the official test? When you do that, you want to get yourself in this mindset of using really good behaviors that you've practiced. So set yourself some specific goal, whether it's having good timing, or whether it is following a really good process or something else that you're struggling with. Set a specific goal, because you have to pay attention to something in order to make changes. All right. As I said, we have a time set coming up here. It is a quant time set, and there are 3 problems that we're going to do. Now, a lot of you probably know that, or maybe at least some of you know that quant problems on average get about 2 minutes to solve, okay? What I'm gonna do today is a little bit tricky, and we'll talk about it afterwards, why this decision was made. But you're gonna have 3 problems on the next screen, and instead of the traditional 6 minutes, which would be standard timing, I am gonna give you 4 minutes to solve them. Now, what I would love to see you do with that is to make good decisions. So what we're doing is kind of mimicking the feeling of being behind a little bit when you fall behind on a particular section. All right, so we're going to jump into this. You're going to have 4 minutes. And again, don't feel stressed and try to rush through every problem. Really try to make some good decisions about what problem is going to be best for you. You'll see all of them on the slide simply for the sake of all of you being able to see the problems, but please try to go through them as if it was the real test. So don't read ahead, make decisions individually before moving on to the next problem. Okay. All right, moving on to the next slide here, and your 4 minutes is going to start right now. You have 2 minutes remaining. All right, that is 4 minutes. Now, in chat, please tell me which problem you thought was the most difficult in this time set. And bonus, tell me also what you did about that. Did you spend more time on that problem that was most difficult, or did you choose to skip that problem? Got to vote for number 3. Another vote for number 3, vote for 1. And there's no right answer to this, by the way. I'm just looking to see kind of what group consensus is a little bit. All right, we've got votes for every single problem here. That is awesome. And I also see some different approaches. Some said that they found a question to be challenging, so they spent like 20 seconds on it and then skipped it. Others spent more time on the more difficult problem. We're going to talk a little bit about the rationale there. Ultimately, when you're looking at a time set, though, what is best is if you do get to that final problem, especially because while you can see all 3 problems on the screen here, you will not be able to see them on the official test, right? So if you get to the end of an exam and the problems, there may be a problem or a couple of problems at the end that you absolutely could solve. They're in your wheelhouse. They're things you're really good at. If you don't give yourself enough time to get to them and see them, then ultimately you could be seeing your score drop, and not for a particularly great reason, right? Because you could have given yourself enough time by planning a little bit different earlier on in the exam. That's important because the GMAT is an adaptive exam. So for those of you who don't know, it's adaptive, which means that really your score is kind of going up and down, up and down, up and down as you go along. And then where you end up, the difficulty level that you end at is corresponding to the score that you get. And that means that essentially you want to make sure that you are at the highest difficulty level possible toward the end of the test. So throughout, you can be missing problems and going down, but then you need to fight your way back up, right? So it's like this up, down, up, down. That's a great trend to see. Okay, we are going to talk about the solutions to these problems. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about the rationale for putting together this time set. Because I want you all to put together awesome time sets on your own. Not just good time sets, but great ones that help you to study effectively. Okay, all of these are Manhattan Prep questions, by the way. Now, timing guidelines. So you can create time sets that are quant time sets or verbal. I chose quant for this evening simply because I had to choose one. I had to choose quant or verbal, so I focused on quant. Quant is an easy one because ideal conditions are about 2 minutes per problem. Verbal gets a little trickier. So you have 65 minutes for 36 problems, and you certainly have sort of ideal times for each type of problem, and we'll look at that in a bit here. But essentially that means that it's a lot trickier to calculate how much time you should give yourself on a particular time set. It's also trickier to figure out exactly which types of problems should be in that time set. It's still worth doing for verbal though. It just takes a little bit more effort to figure that out. One good way to go about it is to create time sets that are approximately like a fourth or a sixth, like easy numbers to work with for the verbal section. So you'll see here, it's about 11 minutes if you finish 6 problems. So it's about 16.25 minutes if you finish 9 problems. Those are some good benchmarks to use rather than choosing some other more difficult number to work with. All right, JD, I was just reading your answer here regarding the first problem. Yeah, we're definitely gonna talk about that in a moment here. I like your thought process. All right, so these are ideal timing conditions. We didn't follow ideal conditions just now though, right? What we did just now is what I call a rushed time set. For example, 4 problems in 6 minutes or 3 problems in 4 minutes. The reason for doing that is because if you are chronically running behind on time, chronically lagging on your practice exams, you want to practice in a way that helps you get back up to speed. So for those of you who maybe didn't get to the end of this time set, you have to ask yourself, what part of the process do you need to change so that you are deciding earlier on to bail on a problem and giving yourself enough time to get to the end? That skill is the same kind of skill that you're going to use on the practice exams and on the official test, but you're practicing it in a smaller time set. Opposite of this is the slow down time set. So for those of you who are chronic rushers, you see yourself rushing and having a lot of time left at the end of your sections. You want to practice a time set in which you give yourself a little bit more time. What does that feel like to take more time for problems? So if you're in the middle of a section on the CAT and you see, oh, wow, I'm actually 4 minutes ahead of where I should be, you want to slow it down. You want to give yourself a little bit extra. And then finally, segmented or minute time sets. An example of this would be creating a time set with 4 problems, and for each problem, you give yourself 1 minute to understand and plan, and then 1 minute to solve. So you're still probably going to follow standard timing for these, but instead of just setting your stopwatch and watching it take all the way through, you're going to have to use the lap setting or something similar to make sure that you're advancing at the right times. All right. The biggest thing with timing too is just practicing noticing your timing, right? Some people struggle with timing not because they don't know what to do, but because they're not checking in regularly. So make sure this is something that's a part of your regular practice. I definitely can tell you the approximate difficulty of these problems. Yeah. All right. The number of problems to include in a time set. Now, this is a fun one. So standard for quant is 4. For verbal, it's more like 6-ish. But you can do anything you want, obviously. The first question that you want to ask yourself is, what are you practicing? So when you're choosing a smaller number of problems to include in a time set, you're practicing timing and you're practicing problem approach, but you're doing it on a really small level. So really, you're making sure that you can stay on track for a few problems in a row. When you get into this space where you're choosing more like 12 problems or even 16 problems, what you're doing then is making sure that you can sustain that good timing over a much longer arc. It's also practicing endurance more than it is about each individual problem, right? It's, can you continue over many problems and stay focused and keep good timing and pay attention to all the things you need to, that's really more something that you want to be doing later on in your studies. So starting off, shorter time sets are going to be better. I saw a hand raised. Is there a question I can answer? I will wait for the question in chat here. These longer time sets at the end, then you'll see 31 and 36, that's an entire section for each of these. Now, it's not common. You're not going to be doing entire sections as time sets. You might want to do that occasionally, though, mostly because you are trying to avoid completing a full CAT. Maybe because you're trying to avoid spending the time, or because you're trying to avoid seeing a score. Sometimes it's not advantageous necessarily to see a score, especially if you're getting close to your official test date. You want to practice all the right behaviors, but you're not trying to get that score to psych yourself out. Question number 2 to ask yourself is, how many questions do you need to practice the skill that you're trying to practice? If you are trying to practice a particular question type, you probably don't need 16 questions to do that, right? Might be even difficult to come up with 16 questions. Especially if it's content related, you don't need 16 questions. So think about that as you're putting together your time set as well. And then how many questions do you have time to complete and fully review? Now, it doesn't have to be right in the same sitting, but it should be the same day that you're reviewing, because you don't want to forget the problems that you've completed. So if you have time to complete 16 problems as a time set, for example, but you don't have time to review all of those, do a shorter time set in the meantime. Plan your longer ones for some other time that you do have the ability to do that. All right, and this last note here is about being CAT averse or CAT dependent. So if you are trying to avoid a CAT, don't do a long time set just because you're scared of a CAT. So avoid these if you're simply trying to avoid a CAT. If you're CAT dependent, though, if you're like doing CATs every other day, trying to get as many practice exams as you can, that's not necessarily a great approach either. You want to do them probably every 10 to 14 days at most. And as you're starting off your studying, you can do them less than that even, because you're covering a lot of content at the beginning. All right, so if you are doing a lot of CATs and you're trying to break yourself of that habit in particular, you can do some full section time sets to satisfy the urge to complete a CAT without actually seeing that score at the end. Break the habit a little bit. All right, choosing quant problems. If you're creating a quant time set, these are the specific areas that you probably want to choose. So content areas that are your low-hanging fruits to improve. Question types that you complete well individually, but miss on a CAT or in a time set. So basically, these are content areas that you want to improve upon, right? You're looking and you see, wow, every time fractions come up, I miss them, or every time I see an algebra problem, I miss it. And that's something that you want to work into your time sets. Maybe you do several of those problems in a row, or maybe you create a longer time set and you weave in some other material as well. Question types that you complete well individually but miss on a CAT. So maybe data sufficiency as one example. You do well on them if you complete them one by one, but on a CAT, you're just seeing that you're really struggling with them. If that's the case, then you want to work those into some time sets and seeing, is your process just suffering when you're completing problem after problem? You also want to include a mix of difficulty levels, including some easier problems, right? You don't want to do all incredibly insane difficult problems. It's a lot better to practice really good process on easy and moderate level problems than it is to tackle every really difficult problem out there. You have to get the easy problems and the medium problems all correct. Not all, but you have to get those correct to see your score increase. If you miss a lot of the really difficult problems, that's absolutely okay. They really don't hurt your score as much to miss. And then try to make it realistic, right? Aim for your time sets to be test-like. So As much as you can work in a mixture of things and not know exactly what to expect, that's going to be best for you. One thing that you can do in order to ensure this is to create lists of time sets, the specific questions that you want to include in a time set, and then don't do them that day, do those a different day, right? So you just have these running lists of problems that you've already sectioned into time sets for specific purposes. But you give yourself a little bit of time to forget exactly what was on it. All right, so in chat, I'm going to go back to our problem slides here with the problems that we completed. I want you to tell me what you think that I was focused on here. What do these questions have in common? What was I as a test taker trying to make sure that I was practicing? There are a number of different things, by the way. I'm going to wait for a few comments to come in here before commenting on my own. I'm loving these comments rolling in. All right, got some answers here. Several people noting fractions and percents. Absolutely, we got a lot of fractions going on here, right? Fractions and percents are this game right here. Another couple of people noted different strategies. Yeah, absolutely. There's a common theme here of kind of interesting strategies that you can use. You can approach them in sort of traditional ways. You can also approach them in some non-traditional ways that are maybe a little bit faster. Ideally, that's what you would be doing. So a really good GMAT test taker is focused not on doing everything the right way that you learned in school necessarily, but the way that's going to be the fastest path to the right answer, or very close to the right answer, right? Excellent. So this is exactly the kind of thing that you're going to be seeing, that you want to be putting together for yourself. If you know that fractions are a concern for you or percents are a concern for you, then you're going to put together some problems that directly address that. Or if you know that you're solving everything using algebra and that you need to branch out and use other solution methods, make yourself a time set that helps you to do that in particular. Now, I've told you that 4 is a very common number of problems to include in a quant time set, and then I chose 3, which is probably, seems at least a little bit weird to some of you, right? Basically, the rationale behind this, and maybe some of you have guessed it, is simply the amount of time that we have this evening and what fits really, really nicely on this particular screen, because these are all longer problems. So sometimes you're choosing things just for practical reasons, right? It doesn't have to be some huge study altering purpose. So I was choosing quant problems. Choosing verbal problems, very similar. You want to choose the number of problems based on easy numbers to calculate or based on timing per question. Here's another timing breakdown here. You also can choose one specific question type for a verbal, similarly to quant, or you can choose according to official exam proportions. So they're each approximately a third of the section, SCR, C, and CR, but I call CR the small third. It's a little bit, you're going to see slightly fewer CR problems than SC or RC typically. Again, you want to select varying difficulty levels, and you really want to aim for this to be a test-like experience. You don't want to create a time set for yourself that you think, well, it wasn't really anything like the real test. If you do that, then it's like, you want to practice like you would like to perform, right? So creating those time sets for yourself where you know exactly what to expect and the difficulty level doesn't vary. It's not giving you that test-like experience. So you're not practicing like you want to perform. Okay, we're getting to the review section. What you have all been waiting for, perhaps. All right, for the set that we just completed, I first want you to think about the set as a whole. So which questions did you feel the most confident answering? You already all answered which question you felt the least confident. So which ones did you feel really good about? How was your timing? Did you have to rush or skip the final problem? Did you spend more time on questions you could get right? So typically you want to think about this like those lower difficulty and moderate difficulty problems give you really the most bang for your buck, right? They give you they're the most impact to your score. When you think about that, you should be doing a little bit of assessing up front. So you should think to yourself, as soon as a problem comes on the screen, man, how difficult do I think this really is? If it is a really difficult problem, or if you start to solve it and you realize, ooh, this seems a lot more difficult than I thought it was, you actually don't want to spend more time on it, because then you're robbing yourself of that time to devote on problems that you could get right. Instead, you want to think, this is a great opportunity for me to bail and make up my time somewhere else. I want to devote this time somewhere, or if I'm running behind, it's a great opportunity to catch back up. All right, looking at some questions here. If you select 600 to 700 levels, you would already know which level and be able to more easily skip on the 700. I'm just thinking about your question here. I think I understand. It sounds like you're choosing a mix of problems at the 600 to 700 and then 700 plus levels. And so you're saying that you already know what difficulty levels they are, but on the exam, so you're not practicing that skill for the exam. I would recommend changing your approach to creating these time sets, essentially. So I would recommend varying the difficulty level, because that is a skill that you really do want to practice. It's actually something that you can practice independently as well. Go into the official guide is a little bit tricky when doing this, but you could go into the official guide and estimate difficulty levels. You could find other practice problems. Manhattan Prep's books are great. If you have a book set, then you can certainly look at those problems and estimate difficulty level. And then typically in our answers, we outline how difficult each problem was. Yeah, this is a good comment too. You felt pretty confident on number 2 once you skipped the first one. I like that you skipped the first one also. That's something that you absolutely can do. Perfectly fine if you assess a problem and think, oh, this is just not me, this is not mine today. Perfectly fine. It isn't a great idea to skip 2 in a row, you're right, unless you really, really need to, but skipping that first one probably made you feel really good right off the bat, right? So instead of going into it feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm behind, you were like, no problem. I don't like problem number 1 anyway. Goodbye. I'll take a guess on it. Maybe I'll get it right anyway. Now I'm feeling pretty good on the next couple of problems here. That's the kind of setup that you want for yourself on the official exam as well. You do not want to get into a high pressure situation where you're looking at the final 5 problems in a section and you are so far behind that you have a minute left on each of them. It's just a bad feeling, right? Leads to a lot of extra unnecessary stress. So throughout the section, you really want to be paying attention to your timing and making sure that you are resolving any issues as they come up, not waiting to resolve them. All right, so after you think about the set as a whole, then review each question. And you're going to do this for a while, right? So we're going to spend like 5-ish minutes per question this evening. You can spend even more time than that on your own. Ideally, you're looking at least 4 minutes of review per question, but really ideally more like 10. You want to review a lot more than you attempt new problems. And that's true just always. It is much better to review one problem 3 times than to solve 3 new problems. And I say that because there are a lot of problems that are similar to one another, right? You're never going to see one problem that you solve on the official exam. None of the problems that you just saw are on the official test. Sorry to break it to you. But you might see something like it, right? You might see something that's pretty similar, which means that if you get the takeaway from these problems and you really internalize it and you understand how to approach that similar problem when you see it, then you got a lot of mileage out of this problem that you just solved. And that's what you're looking to do. You're looking to learn something new from every single problem that you attempt. And if you're not, then you're going through them too quickly. Okay, so when you review each question, first review without looking at the correct answer. Just what went well? What would you have changed? How did you solve it? Was there another way you could have done it that would have been better, maybe? Did you use any alternative solution methods if it was quant? If not, could you have? Then, only after thinking about all of these things on your own, look up the correct answer for that problem. And then ask yourself, okay, now that I know that, how does that change my perceptions? Does anything feel different now? Do you understand how the answer was reached? And do you see any other solution methods now that you know the answer is correct or that your answer was incorrect? Okay. I do know the yellow pad technique. Had a question here. Do I know the yellow pad technique for timing? It is a Manhattan prep technique, absolutely. A quick overview. Basically, you're going to have a yellow pad. I don't have mine handy enough to grab here. It's a wet erase pad. So it's like essentially laminated, right? And you have a wet erase marker that you use for it. And essentially what you do with that pad is you split it into 4. Give me one moment here. This is a really, I'm glad this question came up. This is a great way to keep track of your timing on the official test. Okay, so pretend this is your yellow pad. Pretend that I can draw a straight line as well. You're going to divide your yellow pad into 4 sections. And yeah, you should learn it ASAP, definitely. This is the bottom of the page then, right? And you're going to have multiple pages in your yellow pad. So it truly is like sort of like a notebook where you can like spiral bound at the top and you can flip past them. So there will be many pages. You'll split them into 4 like this. And then there will be a number at the bottom. And the number is different for each page that you can flip. And you're going to spend time at the beginning of each section setting this up. So this is particularly for quant. Now, when you're doing problems, you're going to put all of your work in these areas. Work for problem number 1, work for problem number 2, number 3, number 4, etc. So there are only going to be 4 problems that you're going to complete on a page. This number at the bottom is the approximate timing that you should be at when you get to the bottom of this page. So after you finish problem number 4, this is about where you should be. If you're plus or minus 2 minutes, that's probably okay. If it's anything more than that, then you need to do something about it right away. Again, do not wait to resolve your timing issues. All right. The first page has 3 problems and every other page has 4 for quant. The question was, is it 3 or 4 problems per page? How do you know what to put at the bottom right corner? There are some really good articles that we have written on these this timing method, the yellow pad method. I would definitely recommend going to check them out. You know, because they're going to be the same every time. So it's basically just how much time does it take to complete 3 problems for the first page or 4 problems for every other page for quant. Thank you so much, Neil. I was just going out to grab that. I appreciate it. Well, I just lost my train of thought now. So really, you could calculate the numbers yourself. I just memorized them, honestly. And trust me, I'm not a person who memorizes a lot of things, but for me, this was worth it. All right. Let's review these problems, shall we? We'll take a few minutes here. I chose these because all of them felt fun to me. I really liked these and the solution methods that they presented. All right. This first one, there are a lot of ways that you can go about this. So if anyone wants to share their method in the chat, absolutely, please feel free to do so. Of course, you can set it up. There were 9,180 people. Of the participants, 4/9, and actually I'm going to pause right here because I just jumped right into solving this, which is something I tell everybody not to do. Wow. The way that I approach every quant problem is actually by reading the question itself first. So I jump past the information to the final question. I do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, it really helps me to stay focused on what is important about the information that I'm going to read. Number two, I can do a little bit of assessing up front. So this question is, how many participants in total had at least one blue-eyed parent? Without reading the information, I'm assuming that it has something to do with a research study, participants, that they had to have at least one blue-eyed parent. Maybe they have two, hopefully not three, that'd be weird. At least one blue-eyed parent, although there are a lot of alternative situations, I guess, biological parents. I'm also doing some looking at the answer choices here. So how many participants in total? And I'm looking at these and I'm seeing a really wide range, right? 780, 2,700, that's a big jump, all the way up to 8,400. So looking at this, I'm already seeing that I might be able to do some quicker math than what the information presents. In particular, I might be able to do a little bit of estimating and really just get close enough for the right answer. Okay, I have it in chat here. Yes, absolutely, you can do the math. You can definitely do the math here, right? Okay, a total of 9,180 people participated in a research study. This confirms what I thought originally. There's a research study with participants. All right, on the genetics of eye color. Of the participants, 4/9 had two parents with blue eyes. So you could certainly set this up and say this times 4/9 equals some number. And of the remaining participants, what fraction of participants are remaining at this point? Well, I'm going to pause here. I'm going to think, well, yeah, exactly. 5/9. We had 4/9 already. So the remaining participants would be 9,180 times 5/9. But it's not that whole group. 8/17 had one parent with blue eyes. Ugh. I don't like this at all. This isn't working out for me. As a good GMAT test taker, very good GMAT test taker, I am just a little bit lazy, right? If you're not just a little bit lazy, then you should train yourself to be. Because I'm seeing these numbers and I'm like, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. How can I do this a little bit more easily? And I'm seeing the answer in chat here, which is awesome. 4/9 is a little less than half. Yeah, absolutely. And if I think about this number right here, 9ths, I'm like, oh, well, this is about 9,000. So a 9th would be 1,000. So really, if I'm getting close enough, this is going to be about 4,000. Not exactly. I'm going to be a little bit off. And in fact, I'm probably a little bit under because I rounded this number down. But this is pretty quick, right? Feels nice. Feels nice to not work as hard. Again, here, I'm going to make this easier, right? So 5/9 of this number. So this is going to be 5,000. And then 8/17 is really about half. So this is about 2,500. Now, this is the folks with two parents who had blue eyes, and these are the participants with one parent. I need the participants who had at least one blue-eyed parent. So really, what I'm seeing here is it's going to be both of these numbers together. So my final estimate is about 6,500, and I see that answer choice D is only 20 off. Wow. Even if it was a few hundred off, honestly, I would be absolutely fine with that because the order of magnitude on these answer choices means that they're far enough apart that I probably didn't make a big mistake, you know? It's a lot more likely to make mistakes doing really complex math than it is to do this sort of like rounding work. Just reading some chat messages here. You totally agree your approach is not. What do you mean by this? Can you elaborate a little bit? You don't learn anything. Oh, by doing the longer approach. Yeah. Right. You don't, when you do the longer approach, it's not bad. It's not wrong. It's just that it's not going to help you on the official exam, right? You know that you know how to do this math. I know that you know how to do this math. You just showed me that. The question for you now is, can you teach yourself to do it another way as well? So when you're reviewing these problems, what you want to do is do it the way that you know it, if that's the only way that you can do it during the official time set. But when you're reviewing, you want to think of every possible way that you can to solve a problem. Think of alternative approaches, non-traditional approaches. The top strategies that I typically recommend, I like to call WEST. I'm going to write out that acronym. WEST, working backwards, estimate, smart numbers, and testing cases, test cases. So these collectively are what I like to call WEST, and these are traditionally methods that can be very helpful in quant problems. So if you're looking for an alternative path versus just doing the straightforward math or algebra, then think of one of these. All right. Thank you for this. Thank you, problem, for giving us this new learning. Now we're on to the next one. Man, I love a library. I don't know if any of you love libraries, but I've really missed libraries during COVID. That's partly why I chose this problem. I also chose it because of fractions. WEST stood for work backwards, that's the W. The E is estimate, the S is smart numbers, and the T is test cases. So these are all other approaches aside from just doing the straightforward strict math, right? So the previous problem we just looked at, this was E for estimate. Basically, estimate is just, we didn't do all the math. We just said, well, 8 over 17 is about half. 4 over 9 is a little bit less than half. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, excellent. Now, this one is an interesting problem, right? There are a lot of ways that you could go about this problem as well. That's true of most GMAT problems, especially the quant section. There are a lot of ways. Oh, wow, I'm already seeing the answer in chat. Yeah, smart numbers. So this is the S that I was just talking about. When you're looking at using smart numbers, basically that means make up your own numbers. You cannot always do this. It's not every problem that offers up this opportunity. The way that you're going to know is that there aren't real numbers listed in the problem. It's only relationships given or variables given. In this case, we have a third of the books from library A, a fourth of the books from library B. And then in the answer choices, I have a bunch of fractions as well. This is showing me that these are relationships also. Never is it defined how many books are in library A or in library B, which means that I can really just make that up. And in this case, rather than doing a bunch of manipulating with fractions, which is hard and time consuming, I'm going to make up some nice numbers to use, and then I'm going to roll with that because it's going to make my life a lot easier. Does anyone know by any chance what number might be nice to use in this case for the number of books in library A and in library B? It doesn't have to be one particular number, by the way. There are different options. I'm seeing some folks choose 12 and 24. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, 12 is a really good number here. Absolutely. We see that the new space will house 1/3 along with 1/4. We want a number that's going to play nicely with either of these fractions, right? Ultimately, when I'm looking at these, I think of the number 12. All right. So again, I read the question first. What proportion of the books in the new space have come from library A? I almost always write the question down as well. If I'm being a good GMAT test taker, I write it down. With a question mark next to it, because I don't want to forget what my question is, right? So often happens, you would be surprised. All right. Library A, I'm going to say that has 12 books. And it has to be a number that makes sense, right? It has to be a number that's real. So I couldn't say negative 12 books. That would be bizarre. 12 books in a library would be strange, certainly, but it's possible. And then I also know from reading this that there are twice as many books in library B as in library A. So I'm going to call this one 24. Now, this is another GMAT skill, really paying attention to detail. So if you are struggling to translate this into something that makes sense for yourself, if you're struggling with word problems, basically, really try to take time to break down each sentence as you go. That would be my advice to you. So read slower than what you would normally like to, and make sure that you really understand each piece of information as you read it. If you get to the end of it and you haven't understood, it's really hard to synthesize all of that. Okay, that was the old situation, 12 and 24. In the new situation, the new space is going to house 1/3 of the books from library A and 1/4 of the books from library B. And I like to write these down so that I don't flip them. And I'm reading it again to make sure I didn't flip them. Okay, I got it right. All right, so 1/3 of 12, that's pretty easy math. I'm going to do 4 here, and then 1/4 of 24, this is going to be 6. Great. So now I'm looking at my question again. Library A, the proportion of new books, the proportion of books from library A in the new library. Well, that's going to be A over the total, right? The proportion of books from library A over the total, which really equals A over A plus B. Probably seems a little facetious that I'm writing it down like this, but it can really be very helpful. On easier problems like this, I would call this an easy to mid difficulty problem, by the way. The previous problem I would call it moderate, but if you estimate, it becomes very easy. Now, again, this might seem like a facetious step that I'm taking. It's just not necessary, but you want to practice like you're going to take the test. So sometimes when you practice with easier problems, you fall into kind of like maybe lazy kinds of behaviors. And this is not a good kind of lazy behavior, right? Not the, you want to be a little lazy. Sometimes you're going to fall into behaviors where maybe you're not writing out all of the work that you do. Maybe you are taking some sort of mental shortcuts because you know that you can. But because you're practicing that way on the easier problems, when you get to the more difficult problems, you're probably going to do the same thing. And on those problems, you really cannot afford to do that. So while it's not desirable to chart everything out like this, it still is probably something that you want to do, because when it gets to a difficult problem, then you've practiced this skill over and over and over again. All right, 4 over 10, if we simplify that, then the answer is going to be B, 2 over 5. The last thing I want to call your attention to here is that we have a couple of what I call evil twins in our answer choices. Evil twins are answer choices that pair up for some reason. And in this case, these evil twins pair up to equal 1, which would be the total proportion of all the books, right? Now, when you see evil twins, I can't say that it's always the case, but almost always the case that one of them is going to be the correct answer. So automatically, when looking at this problem, if you paid attention to the answer choices before jumping in to solving, then you know something about what you're expecting to find here, right? You also know that maybe if you can do some estimating and figure out, is library A proportion smaller or larger than B, then you probably can get to the right answer without really doing any math. And that's a really good move if you're running behind on time. So in this case, if I know that there are twice as many books in library B as library A, then I'm thinking the proportion for A is probably smaller. Even though A is a third, which is slightly bigger than a quarter, B having twice as many books, that's a pretty big difference, which means that the proportion of books in library A is going to be the smaller of the two evil twins. If evil twins are something that is foreign to you, then definitely go do some research on this because it's a very interesting and helpful topic. All right. Final question. I have several people say that this one was the hardest one, and potentially because it's data sufficiency, right? So data sufficiency gets kind of weird. Okay, again, I'm reading the question first. How many participants into, oh gosh, I am so sorry. No reason that number 3 was the hardest is because I copied the wrong text in here. So we will not be doing this one. Let me look to see if I had it on the next slide. Nope, I don't. I'm so sorry about that. So this question was asking about the original slide had the right question. Weird, it must be something happening with my slideshow then. The way I copied it over. There we go, thank you, yep. Okay, company Z, perfect. So that's not why it was hard. It was just hard because it was. All right, company Z sells only chairs and tables. What percent of its revenue in 2008 did company Z derive from its sale of chairs? So when we're looking at percent of revenue, again, I threw this one in here because the first couple of problems were fractions. With fractions, decimals, percents, and ratios, we call FDPR. Man, these are all related, right? If I have a fraction like 1/2, I can turn that into a decimal, 0.5. I can turn that into a percent, 50%. I could also turn it into a ratio, which is the hardest of the 4 typically to do and the least comfortable. But a fraction is part over whole. A ratio is part to part. So if I had 1/2 as my fraction, then my ratio would be 1:1, because both of the parts are going to be 1 in this case. So I threw in this percents problem because it really is strongly connected to fractions. So a lot of people struggling with fractions are going to struggle with percents as well. And ratios. Okay. So looking at this problem, I'm going to do a little bit of predicting. What percent of its revenue did company Z derive from its sale of chairs? Well, I know it sells only chairs and tables, right? So C plus T is going to be my total. And if I'm looking at percent, I can also think about it as a fraction. So I want to think about it as C over C plus T. And I'm also thinking that it's revenue, right? This gets a little bit tricky because I'm already doing some predicting that they might not tell me the revenue exactly. I might have to think about that a little bit. All right, looking at statement 1 then. In 2008, the price of tables sold by company Z. So here I have the price of tables, not the revenue from tables, the price. So I'm already seeing that the predicting I did was, it was solid. Okay, the price was 10% higher than the price of chairs. Can anyone tell me in chat why this does not help me enough to answer the question? So here I've got my answer grid that we typically use for data sufficiency. I'll give you a moment to type and think. Yeah, absolutely. I need quantity as well, right? What if the price of my table, I'm selling tables for $1,000 each. They're very nice tables. And my chairs were 10% lower than that, but maybe I sold 10 times the number of chairs. So we wouldn't know the percent of revenue, right? Because revenue has to do with how much money we received from selling something. So statement 1 does not answer the question fully for me. I would also need quantity in addition to price, which means I can cross out both answers A and D. A is statement 1 is sufficient by itself, not true. D is either of them is sufficient alone, not true in this case because statement 1 isn't enough. At Manhattan Prep, we use this little grid to keep track of answer choices because it's a lot easier than crossing them out individually. All right, so I've got 3 answer choices left. My odds are already better, right? It's like a 33% chance of getting this problem right rather than a 20%. All right. Statement 2, in 2008, company Z sold 20% fewer tables than chairs. Well, now I have quantity, but I don't know the costs of each of them, right? So I can't answer a question about revenue, which has to do with the total amount of dollars that I received from the sales. So statement 2 doesn't help me fully to answer the question. So it's either going to be C or E. In chat, can you tell me whether you chose C or whether you chose E? I'm seeing mostly C's and some E's. Yeah, the C's have it. So here we have price. Here we have quantity. I'm actually not going to do the math to figure it out precisely because I don't have to. And again, I'm a slightly lazy test taker, which is a good thing to be on the GMAT. I know enough at this point to know that if I have price and if I have quantity, then I can answer a question about total revenue. Now, in some cases, you're going to need to be a little bit careful with this, but in this one, I know that I'm going to be able to do that. All right. This was the hardest of the 3 problems in terms of difficulty level. I would call this higher end of moderate. So the first one was like easy, borderline moderate. The second one was heading more into the moderate level. And then the third one, I would say it would be like higher end of moderate heading into difficult. All right. Yep, absolutely. You're welcome. Heading back to my final slides here. Takeaways. Time sets are really important. You should definitely be working time sets into your study. You should set really clear goals for your time sets though. So rather than just throwing some problems together and saying like, oh, I did some practice, make sure that you know why you're including particular problems. How does getting question 1 wrong with question 2 and 3 right balance out? How would you get question 2? Would you get question 2 or question 3 if you got question 1 wrong? Are you saying that because of the difficulty level, Neil? I see. You know, it truly just depends. It depends on what portion of the test that you're at as well. So if you're very early on in the test, then sometimes you'll see some more difficult questions thrown at you regardless. Yeah, and it's okay that you skipped 1, honestly. If that was one that you struggled with it and you looked at it and assessed, hey, this maybe isn't the one for me, and then did well on questions 2 and 3, especially again, if it's early on in the section, you're going to have time to recover from something like that, right? As you get further and further into a section, that's where the questions, it's not that they become more important in terms of your score, it's that you have fewer opportunities to recover from any mistakes that you make. And that's also why skipping earlier on in a section is a better idea. A lot of people save their bailing. They're like, no, I'm feeling great. I'm doing really well. So I'm just going to keep going. Yeah, but you're making yourself really tired, right? Like you're getting more and more tired. So I see people who do really well on the first half of a section. And then on the second half, I just see them start to decline. And a lot of that is really because they've gotten themselves fatigued, right? So they didn't do enough bailing early on. And now they might be a little bit behind on time. So they're doing some bailing, but it's not good bailing where they're feeling good about it. They're like just trying to catch up from being behind, which doesn't have a good feeling. When you create your time sets, they can have different timing. You don't have to go with standard timing for each question. You want to definitely mix up the difficulty level of questions because you want to practice assessing. You want to see a question come up and think, how hard do I think this one is? If it's easy, I need to make sure I get it right. If it's really difficult, I need to be ready to bail if I can't get it. And then include different question types as well, depending on what you need. Ultimately, make sure that you're practicing like you want to perform. So if you're saying to yourself, oh, I'm not bailing enough, then you better practice bailing in your time sets. That's another really good reason to do time sets like we just did earlier in class with not enough time, because it forces you to bail on some problem or be rushed, but that's not the best approach. And then finally, really make sure that you fully review the problems. If you're doing time set after time set and just really cranking through a lot of problems, it's not helping you, right? It's just, you're getting to see more and more problems, but you're not really fully getting the takeaways from them. So make sure that you are reviewing twice as much, at least twice as much as you spend doing the problem. So 2 minutes to do a quant problem, bare minimum, you should review for at least 4 minutes. But you certainly can take longer if you're coming up with new methods to try, new ideas, new things that you're noticing about the problem. That's a really good use of your time. I also encourage people to keep what is called an error or review log. In that, you're tracking problems that you have attempted and that you need to follow up on. You're going to note where you found that problem so you can return to it, any takeaways that you got from attempting it, and then you're going to set a date and you're going to come back to that problem about 2 to 3 weeks after you first tried it. That's enough time that you'll forget the details. You're going to try it again. You're going to make sure that you got those takeaways. So you better be able to do the problem differently this next time, right? If you can't, put it on your list, come back to it one more time or however many times you need in order to really get that takeaway down. All right, here are a few resources that you can use in order to create your time sets. The official guide from GMAT, of course, is a great resource. The official guide also has some online resources typically connected with it, and this is the link for that. So if you have an official guide, then I believe that you can register it using this link. And that will actually help you to create time sets, so you won't have to create them on your own. It's a good practice to do on your own anyway sometimes, though. The Manhattan Prep books also are very helpful with this. So we do have practice questions at the ends of every chapter, and then you'll know exactly what specific topics they pertain to. All right. Finally, if you would like to see any other free Manhattan Prep resources, we do these GMAT free prep hours periodically every couple of weeks. I do have a course coming up that starts in September. So if you would like to try that free live class, you certainly can jump on board. All of my other colleagues are wonderful as well, though. So if you want to try out one of their sessions, you certainly can. All right, any parting questions as we head out here? Oh, any recommendations for the at-home online exam? For the online exam, you do not use a yellow pad like we discussed earlier. You will use a digital whiteboard and then a physical whiteboard. So you need to purchase the physical whiteboard in advance to make sure that you have it, and you need to practice with it. So you need to do a couple of practice exams with that whiteboard and have a good strategy to make sure that you're ready for that. And we do have a blog post about how to use the whiteboard for the at-home exam. How long after you take the prep course should you take the exam? I would say about, it really depends. Okay, so my first answer was about 4 weeks afterward. So anywhere from 4 weeks to 8 weeks. You want to give yourself enough time to cover the material again, just go through and review. You don't have to do every single thing that you did the first time around. But with that said, you want to think about how far away you are from your goal score. If you're still like 150 points away from your goal score, for example, you want to give yourself more time. If you're 50 points away or so, then you probably can safely take it probably 4 or 5 weeks after taking the course. Oh, I love you watch the Manhattan Prep videos on YouTube every day. That's awesome. Oh, the AWA section, the writing section, I wouldn't spend a ton of time studying for that one, honestly. What I would do is make sure that you write several practice essays. And we also have some resources for the essay, I believe, on YouTube. If you go over and search that, I'm trying to think. If not, we should. Ultimately, you want to write though like you're a middle schooler. Like you want to go back to like 7th, 8th grade days, and you want to create yourself a nice little outline where you're like, intro, topic, sentence, detail, topic, sentence, detail. And you're going to make sure that you touch on at least 3 different points. They're each going to have their own paragraph. You're going to write a topic sentence, a little bit more about that topic sentence, transition to the next one, write yourself a nice intro and conclusion. It needs to be really basic. Do not make it fancy. A lot of folks get the top score is in the writing section. I think it's like 11% of people get the top score in the writing section, something like that. So realistically, that is possible to hit. You just want to make sure that you can write a really structured argument. They're going to be focused on that pretty significantly. Do I think 2 arguments are enough for AWA? Why not 3? I think 2 to 3 points, yeah, you want to focus on. So basically the writing section is going to give you some flawed argument, and you're going to be talking about how it's flawed and how it could potentially be improved. You don't want to focus on a lot of different things because it will make your essay sound really disjointed. Instead, you want to pick a few different things, either 2 or 3 different things that you're really going to focus on. And then you're going to write about that and then give it elaborate a little bit, right? A paragraph should be at least 3 sentences long. So don't be writing these really short paragraphs around that. If you need a 150 plus improvement at the end of the Manhattan GMAT prep course, how much time should you go over the material before the official exam? How many practice exams have you taken? Have you already taken your 2nd practice exam? Yes, you have. I would say more like that 8-week mark would be a good idea. You just really want to give yourself enough time to get through the content again, and then also to really set good strategies, right? Once you get to around a 620 to 650 range, your difficulties become a lot less about content and a lot more about strategy, in my experience personally. So as I see my students and what they struggle with, once you hit that range, it's a lot more like you probably understand the content, but maybe you're not applying these alternative solution methods, for example. So you want to make sure that you're ready to do those things, but you can be practicing those things now as well in your time sets. If you're scoring lower than that right now, like you're, like a 550, for example, and you want to hit a 700, then ultimately you do have some content areas likely that you're needing to make sure that you support. Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure to all of you. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining this evening. We have some other prep hours coming up in the not too distant future, so please make sure that you tune back in. Happy studies for all of you, and have a wonderful evening.